going to go ahead and get started. I'm actually going to go ahead and introduce one of our friends and colleagues, Jessica Calderon, and she's actually going to go ahead and get us started with this webinar.
Thank you so much. Meiha Winehinkam, Netwania Ne, Jessica Calderon. I am Tongva and Chumash, and I acknowledge that we're calling in today from Tongva territory, so I'm going to start off with the land acknowledgement. I honor my tribal relatives, past and present, the traditional caretakers of Tovangar, from San Fernando Valley to Huntington Beach, east along the Santa Ana River to Corona and Riverside, and back along the foothills, as well as the 4 Southern Channel Islands, Catalina, Santa Barbara, San Nicolas, and San Clemente. Across our large unceded territory, we continue our efforts to protect our lands, our waters, and our plant and animal relatives. Yararkamokre Hanukfeta, we remember the ancestors. Karuk Nerache, Ayoterhem, we stand with our children, both present and the 7 generations to come. Let us remember to walk gently upon our Earth Mother and give her the love and respect that she deserves. Aweshkoneha, thank you. And I will go ahead and pass the mic back.
Thank you so much, Jessa, for the land acknowledgement. And overall, really appreciate everyone being here and sharing space today. Like mentioned, everyone, welcome to our Mapping Migraciones, Beyond Colonial Borders, Indigenous Perspectives on Migration, Displacement, and the Sacredness of Place. So for today's webinar, we have a lot of exciting things planned, but before we dwell into the fruit of this webinar, I want to go ahead and recap a little bit and talk to y'all a little bit about our Mapping Migraciones project. So as some of y'all may know or may not know, and that's okay, is that this webinar is actually a part of a bigger webinar series called Mapping Migraciones and the Mapping Migraciones project. Now, Mapping Migraciones is a year-long project on behalf of Audubon, California and Latino Outdoors to celebrate Latinidad, migration, and the stories that connect us across the Americas. Now, there's 2 huge components of this project. One of them is a webinar series like the one we are in today, but the other one, it's also the creation of a map. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to go ahead and show y'all a little bit of the website of where we can go ahead and access all of the information on this project. So here we have our Mapping Migraciones landing page. It's audubon.org/mappingmigraciones. And here you will find all of the stuff that relates to this project, from our blurbs of like who it involves in, to our upcoming webinars. Oh, of course, Audubon sometimes wants us to donate, to our check out the map segment. Now, here you will get relocated to our map, and this map is really the nitty-gritty of what this project is the heart of the project. So for this map, we link migratory pathways of birds, but also people. So we're actually collecting stories from people like y'all to be able to show the beauty of migration and the hardships of migration as well. So if you go here on our left-hand column, you'll be able to see multiple stories that we have featured from different countries and the bird we have paired them up with. So swallowtail kite in Argentina. If you want to learn more about the bird, you see here on the left tab, you see a learn about a bird tab. Here, it features a little bit of information of what that bird is, what its wintering grounds look like, what its breeding range is, migration route, and more general fun facts. And on the right-hand tab, you can read a little bit about that person's story. And that person's story can really waver into whatever they felt comfortable sharing. And it's also in various languages in either English or Spanish. So feel free to take some time to check out our page to be able to hear a lot of these vibrant and beautiful stories that were collected. And if you also feel super inspired to share your own story, we also have a tab down here to tell us your story that you can go ahead and collect and click on to be able to share. Now, a little bit about this survey is we do not gather any sensitive information. So no social security, no birthdays, anything like that. So it's meant to really be as confidential as we possibly can. And you are more than welcome to share just as much as you would like. So if there's something you don't feel comfortable sharing, you can definitely leave it blank or share as much as you would like. So I encourage everybody to come in and join us, to be able to really share your stories, be vulnerable, and hold this space with us today. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Christian, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about Latino Conservation Week and Latino Outdoors.
Sorry, 1 year later, I'm still doing that. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Jessa, and everybody for being here tonight. Wanted to give everybody an overview of Latino Outdoors and a little bit about who we are and what we believe in. Latino Outdoors, or LO as I call it, connects, inspires, and engages Latino and Latinx communities in the outdoors, and embraces cultura and familia as part of the outdoor narrative, ensuring our history, our heritage, and our leadership are valued and represented. We're working with others to nurture and foster a world where all Latinx and all BIPOC communities enjoy nature as a safe, inclusive, and welcoming place. A world where the outdoors is a place to share and to celebrate stories, knowledge, and culture, while growing leadership and an active community of outdoor users, mentors, stewards, and future leaders. So we are Latinos, I am. We are gente Latina, Latinx, Latine, and we love the outdoors and protecting the outdoors. And this week happens to be Latino Conservation Week. Latino Conservation Week, as I like to put it, is about conservation, it's about community, and it's about cultura. It's a celebration of partnerships and movements, accomplishments and efforts, a celebration of individuals and communities working together to get more people outdoors, to be good stewards of the land. It's also a celebration of storytelling and history telling and record keeping. It's a celebration of our conservation cultura. So officially, Latino Outdoors, Latino Conservation Week is an initiative from our friends at the Hispanic Access Foundation. And its full name is Latino Conservation Week, Disfrutando y Conservando Nuestra Tierra. And it was created to support the Latino community getting into the outdoors and participating in activities to protect our natural resources. So during this week, you'll see community, nonprofit, faith-based, government orgs, elected officials and agencies, volunteers, community members, elders, youth, hold and participate in events throughout the country, from hiking and camping or virtual hikes to community roundtables, through streaming, events like Mapping Migraciones, film screenings, and the idea is that these activities, this conversation, this mood helps to promote conservation efforts and awareness in their own communities and to provide an opportunity for Latinx people to show their support for permanently protecting our land, water, and air. So this week we focused on themes to get us, from day to day, including recreate responsibly, which is about being responsible and respectful when you're in the outdoors. Rethink outside, which is encouraging people to embrace the smaller ways and the day-to-day ways that we can enjoy the outdoors. It doesn't always have to be an epic journey to Yosemite. You can find nature, you can find the outdoors in your own backyard, in your own household sometimes. Then is advocacy afuera, which is really harnessing the strength, the voting power, honestly, the numbers and the voices and the passion of so many Latinx and BIPOC advocates and activists. And then today is Comunidad y Familia, and that's the celebration of the community and the family, acknowledging that none of this can happen without our friends, without our communities, and without our families all working together. So then we still have Diversify Outdoors, Yo Cuento, and on Sunday, our Latino Conservation Week virtual fiesta, where we'll be presenting our first ever Latino Conservation Week Achievement Award to 3 prominent and emerging leaders in the conservation space. And that is an overview of Latino Outdoors and Latino Conservation Week. Storytelling is such an important part of conserving our lands and respecting and being a part of these spaces. So an opportunity, a project, a storytelling project like Mapping Migraciones, where we get to hold this space and essentially, you know, be able to welcome people from across the country to sit in on these incredibly important and interesting conversations. It's a thrill for us to be able to be a part of that, and I encourage everybody to check out the Mapping Migraciones survey and to submit your story if you're comfortable in doing so. And so with that, I would like to introduce you to a friend, to a colleague, and to a force of nature himself, Marcos Trinidad.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Christian. It's great to be here. I'm really excited for this conversation that we're about to have, a little bit about just what we're really trying to gather through these conversations, and how we're trying to be able to get to a place where we can have a deeper understanding of just what migration means and what it means to different people. I think a lot of the conversations that we've been having, you know, either internally at Debs Park or across the network, or even with our partners, has been enriching in many different ways. And one thing, just with working in this project, is being able to hear everyone's story. And one of the things that I feel was a constant, I'm trying to really phrase it, just, I think it's a magical representation, was the fact that how people are connected to birds and the spiritual connection that folks have with birds and migration. And when I think about the stories that have been shared across the Americas, and the struggles and everything that has gone on, it's pretty magical to think that people, as well as birds, make this journey. And one thing that I was having difficulty processing was the fact that I've never heard a birder look at a migrating bird and admire its beauty and then say, hey, I wish that bird would go back to where it came from. And it's unfortunate that is what a lot of folks hear as we migrate as people. So these conversations were really, I think, hard to have at times. But one thing I was really grateful for, and I'm continued to be grateful for, is having folks like Angela and her organization in my life, because I'm constantly learning and I'm constantly being pushed to do more. And you know, being able to introduce Angela and Sacred Spaces Institute for Indigenous People is one of those, I think, gifts that I get to have, because we've been able to go through work and be able to partner in a very intentional way. And some of the work that we've been able to do at Audubon Debs Park was done in a way, not because we know how to do everything or we have it all figured out, but it was the very opposite, where we didn't know what to do and we couldn't figure it out on our own. And there's this thing where it's just, we just don't want to. We don't want to do it alone. So I'm grateful to have Angela as a part of our network of partners, and really being able to help us understand what it really means to decolonize a nature center within one of the largest and oldest conservation organizations in the country. And it's really meaningful for us and for staff to be able to witness these conversations and be a part of the process that we need to go through to introduce these ideas that are not new ideas. They've always existed. It's just they're new to to us as folks that are trying to combine the conservation that we love with the spiritual practice and with intentional practice. So I am happy to introduce Angela Mooney-Yarsi. She is the executive director for Sacred Places Institute for Indigenous People, and she will be the moderator for this conversation that we'll be having. So Angela and panelists, if you would join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcos. Yeah, it's been wonderful, the opportunity to work with you and Debs, and I'm really grateful that you all took the time to really start to reconcile, at least with the local Audubon Center at Debs, what it means to be a guest on Indigenous lands, because really I think that's what our project was about, and what I hope can be explored through these two amazing panelists we have today. So it's an honor to be here, and thank you all for the opportunity. And so today we have Maritza Alvarez and Jessa Calderon, and I'm going to let the two of them introduce themselves in a particular context. But just to set the stage a little bit, you know, we're here talking about beyond colonial borders and really what multifaceted Indigenous perspectives on migration, displacement, and the sacredness of place mean. And so my first question to both of you, Maritza and Jessa, is if you can just tell us a little bit more about yourself and specifically answer the question, what brings you to this work? How did you get here? And since I'm coming to you from unceded Tongva homelands, we'll defer to Jessa as a Tongva person to kick off that conversation.
Thank you, Angela. So, Me'iha, my name is Jessa Calderon. I did introduce myself in the beginning. I am Tongva and Chumash, as well as Yoeme. I carry quite a few different bloodlines, and I'm very proud of that. And I represent my mother and my father, Tina and Joe Calderon. So I have grown up in Los Angeles, which I guess kind of like automatically was put into Los Angeles Unified School District. And it was a constant battle in LAUSD. You know, it was the constant disrespect of, you know, watching my brother having to get in fights over his long hair. Constant arguments between myself and teachers who were telling me who I was and telling me who I wasn't, you know, openly expressing to my classmates that the Tongva people were all dead, you know, explaining how our ancestors were in like spas and the missions and like life was great for us in that time frame, and, you know, being told that my people came across the Bering Strait, and I mean, so on and so on and so on. And so I came to a place where I knew that I needed to use my voice to speak up for the young children, the new 4th and 5th graders, the new 6th and 7th and 8th graders who are going to find themselves in the same feeling of suicidal tendencies because they feel shame, they feel lost, they feel so disgusting because of what their own teachers are putting on them, what their own classmates are putting on them. You know, and so it's definitely in my goal to rearrange and refocus and re-educate our educational system so that people who come into our ancestral homelands not only know about the people of the land, but also how to care for the land and how to be connected, you know, not only with the land, but themselves as well. So that's definitely a big part of what brings me here into this work.
Thank you for that, Jessa. Those beautiful words. And Maritza, turn it over to you with this beautiful bird in the background. It's a wonderful shot.
Yeah, I got a pretty good story with that bird that I'm hoping I'll be able to share later on. Nimich Trapalos, Nanotoka Maritza Alvarez, Nemi Tongva Tlali. I am on Tongva territory here, otherwise known as Los Angeles. And I'm really, really honored. Thank you, Marcos, for reaching out and for this type of programming going on with this organization. And what brings me to, or what has brought me to this work is basically my love and my connection to the Tonantzin, to our Mother Earth. You know, I think that innately all of us as children and you know, we had that connection, but for whatever reasons, whether it be due to forced displacement or lack of space to or access to green space, we've been disconnected from our relationship to our great Mother Earth. And but the spirit within us that has that innate connection is always there. And so that, along with my love for justice and you know, and my people, has brought me to this work, and on all Indigenous peoples of the world. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you both. So we're here talking about migration and people in place and non-human people as well. And so the first question I'd like to ask both of you is, do you think that the relationship between people and migration has been different prior to and then after colonization? And if so, how has that relationship changed?
Marisa, do you want to start or do you want me to take it?
Go for it.
Well, yeah, it's not even my opinion. Has the relationship changed between the animal peoples and the human peoples? Absolutely, since colonization. Because, you know, what happens with colonization is they begin to decolonize our minds, right? Like they completely reconstruct our mindset and our ideas, our understandings. And so in the ways that they have conditioned us, they have disconnected us from the earth and our relatives of the earth in so many ways, including each other. We don't even have good relationships with our own human species, you know? And again, that totally relates to relationships, and that relates to that colonial border, right? Like we tend to treat people on the other side of that colonial border, on the southern border in particularly, as if they're a whole nother form of species, but they're human beings just like I am. So why do I feel that in some way, somehow, I'm not in connection to them? Well, that's because of the colonization and the conditioning that has happened, you know, and then it's like this mindset of, you know, control. So these borders, they also limit access, not just to people who originally traveled these migrational routes, right? These migrational routes were open to all Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. There was no restrictions, you know, and not only was that those routes were they open to the peoples, but who introduced us to those routes? The animal people. The animal people had those routes before we did, you know, and we owe everything to the animal people. But in conditioning and colonization, they tell us otherwise. They tell us, you know, that is wild, you know, that is not as intelligent as us. That is, and we subjectify them, and we put ourselves higher than them. But see, in that conditioning, what happens with that disconnect is we forgot that it was the plants and the animals that sustained us. It was the plants and animals that were our first teachers in this realm, right? And so we lost that. And it's our responsibility, you know, each and every one of us, if we choose to reconnect with ourselves, to reconnect with the land, and reconnect with the teachings of those animals who are people, and those plants who are people, and understand that they're not wild, they're nature, and we're nature. And when we can make that connection, then we can treat not only the land and the animals better, but each other. And so I can probably go on for another 2 hours with that, but I'll go ahead and let Marisa get some words in.
Yeah, thank you, Jessa. I mean, you know, as well, Marcos, you brought up the whole topic of decolonizing, and I think that it's really important as descendants of original peoples from this continent, in the same ways that the birds are migrating from the tip of Argentina to California, the swallow birds, for example, right? Those type of migrations have been occurring with original peoples of these territories since time immemorial. And with the coming of what Jessa was addressing, colonization, specifically with the doctrine of discovery, it was the Europeans who decided to make this law that determined that if there was lands that were not being used or fenced or farmed, that they had the right to take over those lands. And if there were individuals on those lands, indigenous folks on these territories that were not Christian, that they also had the right to either enslave or attempt to Christianize them in whatever manner worked for them. That doctrine of discovery is really what implanted the borders and perpetuated this system of colonization within every structure that we have today, that we're still dealing with today as indigenous peoples or descendants of indigenous peoples within this continent. And that includes the imposed borders that have been placed. And that type of system continues to disconnect us from one another and really perpetuate the dehumanization of the other. When in reality, what Jessa was covering is that we had migration routes going on in the same way as she mentioned the birds had their routes and the animals had their routes. And we had trading going on from way to the tip of Argentina all the way up to Canada, whether it was on foot as runners or whether it was on canoe across. So for me, this is really a privilege to be able to talk about these things and remind each other, as Jessa has said, you know, we need to remember those things. We need to remember that because we do innately remember in our DNA, but it takes a certain moment of connection with land, water, air, or fire that memory is rekindled. And with that rekindling, we can continue to do the work to shed and heal from these colonial force mentalities and ways of being that has drifted us apart as opposed to bringing us together. And that's where, you know, I think we're going to cover, that's why I think part of the title of this talk was the prophecy of the condor and the eagle, you know, and it's about bringing us peoples together in Centro America, which is the birth of the Quetzal bird. So I just wanted to share that. I'll stop there as well, because I'm sure that there's other questions that are coming up.
Yeah, thank you both. Just such a rich response just from the first question. I really appreciated you both naming the way in which humans learned these routes from the animals and animals as the first teachers. And I think, and thank you also, Maritza, for bringing up the doctrine of discovery, because I really do think that that's where you saw the ideological paradigm shift that is responsible for the situation we're in today. I mean, the earth is on fire, you know? I keep reading these stories and hearing about the forest fires everywhere and knowing how that's affecting not just humans, especially humans who are BIPOC and economically exploited, but all the animals as well, you know? And that's absolutely a result of climate change, which is absolutely a result of this ideological shift from people who are place-based, even as they travel. Just as something you said when we were preparing for this call about those routes that people would migrate, and that along those routes, people are always in right relationship with place. And it reminded me of a conversation I was able to have with an Indigenous gentleman when I was able to travel to Australia before the pandemic. And their map of Australia is similar to the map of California in that there are hundreds and hundreds of Indigenous nations. And he mentioned that he only spoke 3 Indigenous languages. And I was like, only? But he said in context, as people, we traveled everywhere throughout Australia, but it was protocol that you had to speak the language of the brothers and sisters whose lands you traveled through. And so any person who, as Marisa mentioned, was a runner or a canoeer or those folks that did the traveling had as part of their protocol speaking, upwards of 15, 20 languages. And that was a common way of being. I've also heard elders talk about how many words, due to the loss of Indigenous language, even as it's being revitalized now, how many words there would be for different plants that we just don't know, that human beings don't even necessarily have the capacity to hold all those words in our head right now. Not that we can't reignite that, but again, it's this way in which colonization has severed relationships with one another and place, and even internally with ourselves. So I want to get a little more specific with this next question. And as I think also because I just mentioned fires, can you discuss the relationship between Indigenous peoples and movement, migration, and fire, both pre-colonization and in contemporary times?
Yeah, I can definitely start. So I had been taught by my parents that there's a book out there. There's different books that follow the different diaries of the Spaniards that first tried to invade our lands. And so in one of these diaries, they talk about how they came across what they call the Bay of Smokes and what we now know as San Pedro. And they kept going because, there's a big fire. They were not attracted to that area, so they kept going. But what was happening in that moment in time of that smoke was controlled burning. And so we were very known to stay in a general specified area, but to, stay in a particular area for an amount of time and then understand when it was time to allow the earth to replenish itself. And so in contribution and reciprocity of that, our relatives took the opportunity to trim things down and to control burn so that it would, and the word control, it's not, like taking control of the land, it's mine, but it's more of like helping to tend to, right? Like we know, as we can see now, the forests are completely not tended to. They're overran with invasive species, but also with, disease. And so in burning, the burning will kill off the disease, right? And so it makes sure that these plants are healthy and healed, and it gives it the opportunity to replenish itself. And we move on to our other locations that we, went back and forth to. These were our known locations. Some of us went from a mountain area to the beach area, and from here to here, this was our location, and so it was just that understanding that, you've given to us, and now we're going to give to you in a way to allow you to replenish yourself, and we're going to go to our other village and we'll spend time there. And unfortunately, with the way that colonization control mindset is, it's more like mine thing, and you have to own this land and not even care for it, right? So like you've got all these millionaires out in Malibu and all these other places that own title to these lands, and they don't even live on that land, let alone tend to it. Right. And prior to that, the people who did the rancherias, they already dissected the land and tilled it. And that was the whole understanding, Marisa, you touched on it, is, if we weren't farming, then we weren't really taking care of the land. So when those invaders came here, they actually wrote in their diaries that our homelands were like an untouched paradise. But granted, if it was untouched, then it would look like it does today, right? But the fact that it looked like a paradise, it was because we were tending to it. But their mindset was like everything has to be farmed and tilled. And in reality, what we do when we till the land is we destruct it. You know, we're drying up the earth and we're destroying it. You know, all of the ideas of farming today is very destructive and harmful. You know, the way that we're pulling the water from the center of the earth in California, causing it to collapse in some places, like it's completely destructive and disconnected. And so we had a whole nother understanding, you know, and so today, because of that tilling, they have brought their invasive species. The invasive species have taken over, and now you've got these millionaires who have this mass amount of land who, you know, private property, we're not allowed to even step foot on it. Plus, you got Native Americans who are struggling to even, you know, live on their ancestral territory. So it's not like, even if a millionaire did let me tend their land, like I could financially afford to take the day off and go tend to their land to make sure that it's cared for, you know. So it's just, again, with the disconnect and the destruction, it causes us to be disconnected, even though we have a lot of the knowledge base and the tools. We can't utilize our tools because of the way that colonization has conditioned us and formed us into the place that we are today. So I may have went off a little from your question, but thank you for letting me share.
So yeah, I think in regards to, thank you, Jessa. In regards to the portion of the question where you are asking about relationships between Indigenous movement and migration, I think what I'd like to touch on is the fact that, you know, under international law, right? You know, I think it was 2007, there was a law that passed that all people have a right to self-determination under the United Nations Indigenous, the rights of Indigenous people. And that was like very significant, but also, you know, very telling of how backward European thought has been, because it wasn't until then that it was determined that all people, including Indigenous people, have a right to self-determination and have a right to be human. So I bring that up because when we're talking about migration, and in this case, you know, tying it in with the migration of birds, the tendency is for European outdoorsy folks to place value, higher value in animal life as opposed to human life. But the philosophy of Indigenous peoples around the world is that all life is of equal value. And that principle is not the principle. There's a difference in principles with Europeans because that's not the principle. That's a different value. And so as far as like relationships to migration, that's why we have the situation where we have ancestors, our relatives migrating from the South, seeking, whether it's refuge, economic opportunity, whether it's reuniting with family, whether it's, you know, escaping violence that generally has been perpetuated and supported by, you know, imperialistic adventures of this country, arming, you know, conservative leaders in other countries like Central America, then that is going to cause migration. And we're not even talking about like the climate crisis. But so you see these migrations happening, and then what happens is that you have these borders that and these national policies that perpetuate that idea of the other as criminal, as inhuman, non-human, and so they'll create, since '94, policies that are intended to deter migration. So these policies exist where migrants are led into areas that are extremely hostile, away from border towns, so that they can either die due to thirst, or they can die due to, being kidnapped or killed. And that way, the word will pass on that it's not a good idea to migrate, even if you're looking to make a better means for your family and yourself. But as you know, we're resilient and we do what we got to do. And that's the history. And so, again, going back to indigenous movements and migration, that's why it's beautiful when there are organizations like Border Angels, or movements like the Peace and Dignity runs, where, you follow the prophecies of the eagle and the condor, reminding us that we're not really Hispanics and we're not really Latinos. We've been a colonized people, and the majority of us, whether we have 15% to 80% indigenous blood in us, being indigenous means how you walk on this land and how you connect to land, and integrating those values, the non-European values that have caused far more destruction in this world than peace, than unity, and than respect and love for our great Mother Earth. That is what being indigenous is, and understanding and respecting the migration patterns that have existed throughout history prior to white supremacy. So that's all I want to say when it comes, and I'm sorry I'm raising my voice about this, but I feel very passionate and very serious about this issue. So that's my take on that. Thank you.
If I could just add also, we're forgetting a very important element. I had talked about the fire earlier, about the past, but also with the present. The very important element I want to talk about is the salmon, right? Because the salmon, they're migrators as well, and they tie into the birds, right? Like, because the Los Angeles River has been turned into a concrete, nasty, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's not okay. It's, our river is harmed, and she's ill, and in that process we lost our salmon and we lost our trout. But the salmon who have always migrated attracted certain animals and certain birds, and because of that lack of salmon, we're also seeing a lack of these birds. So what that means is, because of colonization and their destructive mindset, we have put a damper on some of these families, right? These birds on their migration. We're not seeing as much as we used to see because there's nothing here for them, right? And so, and also tying in that with the fire is because of the way that Los Angeles, all of the United States, but Los Angeles in particular, the way that we, I don't want to say steal, but let's just call it for what it is. The way that we steal water, that's what's contributing also to the fire damage, because there's pipes, whether we see them or not, there's pipes that are going into our mountain sites. There's pipes that are going into our river sites. There's pipes that are going into our stream sites, and they just take and they take and they take, and they don't care about the natural rivers, the natural streams, the natural lakes, the natural food, right? The water is food source for our plant relatives, and they don't care. And so all of this, it's like the domino effect. It starts with colonization and it domino effects into our human relatives and their livelihood, So I just wanted to merge those together.
Yeah, thank you both. And please don't apologize for raising your voice. I have to keep reminding myself I'm moderating because I'm just getting caught up listening to all the amazing pieces of knowledge you're both dropping. But it reminded me what you're both saying, I think, and to link it back to the doctrine of discovery and different worldviews is, and to birds, is the story. Glenn Coulthard has this article. He's Indigenous, and he's a scholar. And the article is called Place Against Empire. I encourage people to check it out. It's a wonderful piece. It's short, it's just 5 or 6 pages, but it really does an excellent job, I think, of helping people understand where Indigenous folks are rooted in their activism for environmental justice and why. And one of the stories, I use it every time I teach, and one of the stories he references in there from one of his elders is about the hunter and the raven. And the hunter is trying to feed his family, but they're starving. It's winter, and he's out, and he's exhausted, and he's not finding food. And then he sees a raven circling in the distance. And he knows that raven is circling because there's food down there. Well, it's a deer or an elk, and the raven can't pick it up and take it away, but the hunter can kill it, right? And so the hunter, in relationship with that bird, is able to locate the game and kills the game, and then is able to feed his family. But what he does is he cuts off a piece of the meat and he leaves it for the raven. And that's the symbol of the relationship of reciprocity. And I think that's what, both of you really is the through line through what you're saying is what changed via the doctrine of discovery was from folks being in relationships of respect and reciprocity with each other and with land and with the plants and animals who've always lived in these lands. And it changed from a relationship of respect and reciprocity to one of exploitation. Walter Echohawks, who's a well-known Indigenous attorney and scholar, writes in his book, The 10 Worst Indian Law Decisions Ever Decided, about the disconnect between Indigenous worldview and a Western settler colonial worldview. And he calls the Western settler colonial worldview a worldview that's rooted in dominionism. And that comes from the doctrine of discovery. It's about this notion that place and even people are yours to claim and to assert dominion over. And that's very different than Indigenous relationships. And what Walter Echohawks says in this chapter is he talks about how the leap from feeling like you can have assert dominion over land is not a far leap than to thinking that you can assert dominion over animals. And then that, of course, is not a far leap to thinking that you can assert dominion over people, right? And that's where you get systems of enslavement. It's rooted in that, and actually says in the Papal Bulls from Doctrine of Discovery that the Christians are, authorized to go forth and vanquish and enslave and murder anyone who doesn't believe the way they do. But when you look deeper into that, on the surface it may be about Christianity, but when you go deeper, they're talking about things like weapons and mining, and that's really what it was about. It was about, clearing the land of people or controlling the people so that the land can be accessed and exploited. And I think you've all discussed that and hit on that beautifully. And since I'm realizing we only have 10 minutes left of our time, I want to conclude by offering each of you the opportunity to share a bird story. And I'll just start quickly by saying that, since I forgot to say it earlier, I'm from the Ahashiman Nation, and our ancestral territories are in what's now known as Orange County. And, what we may be most famous for is where the swallows come back to every year. They come back to San Juan Capistrano from Argentina. And one of my favorite moments, my favorite memories was being with my cousin, who's now passed on, but who was the chief and chairman of our nation. And I had a friend who was Indigenous from Argentina, and they had the opportunity to meet, and just being able to witness the two of them talk about these connections, as Indigenous people from this continent, but specifically around that migratory path of birds. And I remember hearing them talk, and the three of us just, hypothesizing that in ancient times, both of our peoples probably knew why the swallows came from one place to the other. And maybe one day our people will know that again, because again, through colonization, that's some of the knowledge that's been lost. But so I just want to open it up to both of you to share as we close out a story that, you know, connects all these things around indigeneity and migration and birds.
Yeah, I'd like to share if that's okay.
I was going to offer if you go first.
Thanks. Thank you. Before I share this, the story of that photo in the background there, I just thought about how I was listening to this report on how birds are indicators of the state of our human, the state of our human society, or where we are as humans. And, you know, I'm sure you've all heard about the recent blindness issue going on with a lot of the birds out in the East Coast, how they're becoming blind. And it's really such a strong metaphor of what direction we are moving in as a result of this lack of reciprocity and responsible relationship with our great mother. So I just had to point that out. You just reminded me of that. But I want to move on to the story of this bird behind me. It's a real personal story. I'm actually on a boat in the Gulf of Baja California, and that's I just departed the land where my grandmothers are from. And I went on this boat before sunrise with a local who helped me to make an offering to my grandmother who had just passed. And her ashes were offered to those waters because that's what she wanted. And before she died, as she died in my mom's home, and I asked her, you know, please come to me in a sign. Please come to me and visit me as a bird. And so as I went out that morning, I did this on my own. I needed to do this, travel out there alone, go back. As we were sitting there, as soon as the boat was in the center, this bird landed right on the tip there. And the entire time that I was out there, it remained in that place. And I knew it was my grandmother visiting and saying, here I am. So that's the story of that photo behind there. And that's my story of the bird and being in this place where my matrilineal lineage comes from. So I'll end it there. And I want to just thank everybody for all the wonderful work that you're doing in Indigenous movements and respect for land and all of our relatives. Tlaxcamati.
Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. One that comes to mind, it started with a dream. And I can't go into detail the dream because we'll be here all night. But at the end of the dream, it was a friend of mine who had shifted into a water bird. And so when I told him of this story, I had gone home later that day and I seen two water birds just like hanging out of place, you know. And I just thought, wow, like what a connection. And so when my friend passed away, I was on my way up to his ancestral territory, which is like, they're more like desert people, you know. And so as I'm in his territory, this water bird just swoops down in front of my window and goes back up. And I was like, what a random place for a water bird to be. Like, how out of place is it? You know, and oftentimes, you know, when I'm thinking of him or when I need that connection, I see that water bird that comes to me. It's one of the white egrets. And so I just have had a connection with him and with that bird in particularly. I mean, as coastal people, I've had a connection, but now it's a different symbolic connection, you know. And so I definitely appreciate that connection that I have with him, even in the afterlife, you know. It's a strong reminder about how when our bodies, you know, go underground or we burn them or however we decide, you know, our energy just transitions. We never really expire, we just transition. And so I'd like to leave it there on something to think about on a positive note. And I too would like to thank you all for being in attendance here with us, sharing your time and space with us, and being, you know, open to hearing this discussion between my coworkers and myself. I would love to just send you off, sending you lots of positive love and energy, and I'll pass it back to Angela.
Yes, thank you both. I learned so much, and it's just wonderful to hear these stories. And I'm always honored anytime I get to be in community and conversation with Indigenous folks. And I think as my final words, I'll just say that, you know, again, thank you to Audubon and Marcos for, you know, bringing us together and giving us this space. And for everyone else out there, you know, thank you, Jessa, for dropping our STI info into the chat so folks can see that. And please feel free to reach out. And I just encourage everyone to, you know, continue to think about the ways in which reconnecting with place, and if it's through birds or being in nature or what, but also thinking about how that reconnection can help to heal some of the damage that we've all suffered as a result of colonization, and knowing that Indigenous worldviews and paradigms are what's needed in this time for all of us moving forward to be in better relationship with one another in place. So thank you all.
All right. Hey, thank you. Again, I just want to echo all the love and light that was shared. This is amazing, and I think it's a great space to have these conversations, because it could be scary, it could be rough, and a lot of folks may not be open to having that discussion. So I'm so happy that you were able to join us and share some of that wisdom and knowledge. Tanya, Christian, are you going to come back and say goodbye to everyone? Okay, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for our Mapping Migraciones.